Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to start talking about the endless buffs for Mistweaver, the Mistweaver revival that we're looking at seeing in 8.3, as they have been the most buffed healer that we've seen thus far. Healer tuning has been a major point of contention throughout the WoW community, really, and has just been constantly being iterated on very slowly, very steadily, much more than we've seen previously leading up to Eternal Palace or into BOD. So, very interesting on that one. And so first I want to start going down the line with these Mistweaver changes and give you my thoughts on why they're happening, where they're happening, and how they affect raids and Mythic Plus. So starting us off, the most notable change, the most important change is Rising Mist, getting a increase of healing from 33% and extends your heal over time effects by 4 seconds. Previously was 2. Now this is probably the biggest talent that we've been really looking at going into 8.3, because a lot of the fights in Ny'alotha are pretty heavy in rot. A lot of the early medium bosses, for example, of the raid, have lots of rot and ticking damage. And one of the biggest points of feedback in one of our earlier videos was that the last boss needs to continue the same. There is going to be a secret phase for Ny'alotha, so we don't really know what the damage pattern is going to be on the hardest part of the last encounter. So we'll see. But Rising Mist, the healing effect, the plus 33% healing, is really not that big of a deal. It didn't do that much healing to begin with, but the heal over time extension for 4 seconds is a massive boon for raiding and a very massive boon for Mythic Plus. With this, you're able to set up more efficient Vivify cleaves, especially when there's consistent damage, like we mentioned that Ny'alotha will feature, and it allows you to more easily cover your party pretty much at all times with Renewing Mists. Now, their note was that this talent's currently overshadowed on its row, and we want to make sure it's competitive enough to make it a unique playstyle, a viable option. This not only offers itself as a healing increase, just a straight up throughput increase, but starts redirecting Mistweaver's priorities and makes it a lot more active of a spec, makes it provide some decent passive damage. Again, it's still not a top dog like a Disc or Paladin in terms of its passive damage, but it starts getting incentivized to add some, right? At the cost of a little bit of uptime for healing, but if you're using it to set up lots of throughput later on down the line, it ends up being worth it. The times that you would not take Rising Mist in Ny'alotha, or if you're getting into any fights like Prophet Skitra as one, where the boss will consistently turn into illusions, and you have to chase after the right illusion, get in melee range, start attacking it again. The phases where the boss is just right there in your face don't really last that long, so it can be kind of difficult to utilize, and it may not be the best option for every single encounter. Now, Life Cocoon now absorbs for 60% of the caster's max HP, was 1100% of caster's spell power. So they're basically finding that consistently, Life Cocoon has just scaled horribly ever since it's been introduced, and they really needed to start dropping in some increased power to it. All right, that's been something that's pretty much no surprise, and Revival kind of falls under that same look. We're looking at Enveloping Mist, getting a 10% healing increase, Revival by 12%, Renewing Mist, healing increase by 15%, and cost 2.5% of mana instead of 2.8. And then finally, Vivify's healing increased by 6%. So, across the board, there's been a ton of buffs coming in for Mistweaver that really start trying to amp up its throughput, but some of these later buffs down the line on the list are also likely because of the fact that the Devout Spirit essence, the Spirit of Preservation essence, has gotten a fix, and as it previously was increasing the critical strike chance, or the critical strike power of every Vivified cleave that you would end up getting out. And it was absolutely busted and insane. So that, very similar to the Schism change that Discipline received going into patch 8.3, where it's the damage of Crucible Flame or the damage of Cyclotronic Blast would not be increased by Schism. It's kind of similar down the line where you have these type of essence interactions that shouldn't exist, and a lot of these buffs are probably a result of that, where they said, okay, this essence is very good for Mistweaver, and it would be absolutely broken for them to have it, so let's fix this interaction and give them some buffs along the way. So what this means is that Rising Mist stands as a very strong talent if you're able to consistently be in melee and consistently get good uptime. This allows you to more easily and more steadily plan incoming damage and incentivize you to provide a lot of your own damage, not only from using Rising Sun Kick out on cooldown, but also banking up teachings of the monastery charges. That way you're able to get some 3 blackout kicks, have a greater chance of getting a Rising Sun Kick reset, and then getting another extension from there. So being able to bank up those 3 teachings of the monastery stacks, get your hots out, Rising Sun Kick, then to a blackout kick, into hopefully a reset Rising Sun Kick to get that full extension, and then you switch gears into healing, and then drop a Rising Sun Kick on cooldown again. That looks like the direction that we're going to have, but keep in mind, people haven't been playing Rising Mist for quite a while, so there very well might be some more ingenious playstyles that people will put together, and I'll make sure that we update the channel if we find some of those. We're looking at how viable, and I think this is the biggest question, if we look at how viable is Mistweaver after these changes, I'd say it's pretty close, right? But not quite. Disc and Paladin still are dominating in terms of the raw throughput that they're able to put out, the damage reduction they bring, the passive damage that they bring, and Resto Shaman's just a bit beneath them because Spirit Link's quite helpful. They will easily be able to keep everybody in range of them. There's going to be some spread encounters here and there, but I think Chain Heal will still be able to do its thing. And while there is some movement required, I think Spirit Walker's Grace will be up frequently enough for Resto Shaman to make impact. So then it kind of comes to Mistweaver being about the 4th best healer for the raid. Which, if most fights are going to be tuned properly to 4 or 5 healers, then that's great. You're able to bring decent passive damage, your Revival's getting stronger, Cocoon's getting a bit stronger, and both of those are able to be amped up through versatility gains, which our stats are only going to go up over time. So we start having a couple other better tools, but I think most notably the big thing that will make sure Mistweaver gets into the raid is whether or not your raid brings Brewmasters. Brewmaster has been incredible for a lot of the entirety of the expansion, I should say, because it's been able to mitigate damage so well and has made life so much easier for a lot of the tanks whenever you're having any kind of complicated boss fights. As we move into the end of the expansion, usually most all tanks are able to stand toe-to-toe with the worst of the bosses. And then it starts coming down a little bit more towards what utility do these tanks bring for the specific encounters. And there's been a lot of back and forth onto this one, and I can tell you from my personal perspective, from Future, from my guild, we're definitely looking at maybe there's going to be some fights where we don't need to have the Brewmaster. Prop Pally and Blood DK are often talked about as tanks that can bring a ton of utility, but they're not the only ones, right? As it seems that Demon Hunter could also make some appearances as well. So what this comes down to is that Mistweaver, if Mistweaver can help enable your group to bring a different tank, offer different types of utility, and start making it a strong impact by providing Mystic Touch, and without having to make any big sacrifices across the rest of your raid. Right? We've seen Prop Pally, for example, be able to shut down and interrupt mobs like nobody's business, particularly helpful on Il'gynoth, for example. It greatly reduces the amount of ads that your raid will get. Blood DK has been talked about ad nauseum. Mass Grip being more powerful, its scaling, all of that stuff being very valuable to it, and Brewmaster just mitigates damage and survives good. So if Mistweaver's able to take that position for the Mystic Touch application, then you're in great shape from a raid perspective. In Mythic Plus, this is just a massive buff for the specialization. Rising Mist fills in a lot of the gaps that Mistweaver has held previously, where they would do really amazing healing with Way of the Crane whenever there's tons of mobs that you're able to hit, but it would often heavily struggle whenever there's consistent damage going out onto the group, and you'd have to burn so much extra mana in order to stabilize people. You'd be able to completely stabilize 2 or 3 targets that had Renewing Mist on them, but the other 2 in your party you'd have to bounce back and forth between healing them and burning a lot of mana along the way. With Rising Mist being the go-to talent for Mythic Plus, just across the board, absolutely shattering Focus Thunder. This will make it a lot easier for your weakest point, again, group-wide healing, but it'll also really heavily increase your DPS uptime whenever your tank is getting clobbered. It'll do this by allowing you to more easily extend the duration of Enveloping Mist, which also got buffed. And since you're always running Statue in Mythic Plus, you'll consistently be having a stronger Statue because it's channeling into the tank, you're extending the duration of your Enveloping, and probably renewing Mist on the tank as well, and making it so that you're able to spend a lot more time dealing damage, a lot more time spinning than you otherwise would be able to. It's a huge boon for the spec, and it's sure to fill in, like I said, a lot of the gaps that we've seen previously. Healing some of the most difficult encounters, like a tyrannical Galvatst, just got easier. Being able to deal with split focus between healing the tank and healing the group, like the first phase of Lord and Lady Waycrest, just got a lot easier. Even preparing for large bursts of damage, like we see out of Kragmaw on Tyrannical when we have to deal with a Tantrum. Those just got a lot easier because you're able to start blanketing your group and dealing with that group-wide damage as it comes. Even Overseer Korgus is another one. So many more of these fights get easier the stronger that Rising Mist gets, and when all of the other heals are getting buffed across the board, it starts rising, no pun intended, Mistweaver's potential to start being a very competitive top-end healer. If you also throw in the fact that they have survivability that's probably the best of any healer, with Diffuse or Dampen Harm, along with Fortifying Brew, they really will start making some waves next patch in terms of high-end M+. Some of the weaknesses, though, is that Druid still got the battle res, and as yet, they have not offered any sort of buffs to any of the engineering battle res, making it available to everybody, regardless of profession, increasing the range, or some of the other options to assist, or simply making some of the other specs, Warlock or DK especially, having access to battle res for them would make it a lot more viable to start bringing a Mistweaver, as well as finding some more classes that have more of the utility built into them. I think one of the biggest pieces of that is going to be the Soothe effect, which is only brought by Druids and Hunters. If you're in any sort of Raging week, doesn't matter how good you are, groups are just going to instantly decline you because they want to have a Soothe. If they actually made it so the Soothe ability doesn't remove the Raging Affix, and they nerf the Raging Affix to compensate, that would go a long way for some of these specific weeks, and make it a lot more viable to bring non-Druid healers into the meta. We'll have to see on that one, but what can you do until then? Otherwise, guys, let me know what you think about these current changes, where you think the spec is going to be standing. Like I mentioned, I think Mistweaver next patch is going to be about the 4th best healer, and will absolutely help open the doors for bringing other tanks in if the group really wanted to, for different utility on different fights. Mythic Plus, I think Mistweaver starts going up to that 2nd/3rd placed option, competing with Holy Paladin, and they're just a little bit of utility away from being able to fully compete and be at an equal level with Rested Druid. A lot of the utility, for example, that Rested Druid brings is totally mitigated once you start bringing a Boomkin. But if a Boomkin's not going to be optimal or next patch for Mythic Plus, then that also is going to hurt us. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks so much for tuning in as we started talking about some other specs other than Priest, as you usually know. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Be sure to check out the live stream linked in the description below for more content. Take it easy, guys.